welcome everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Olivia. And she's going to be our host today, and we'll be kind of managing some of the questions. You can ask questions two different, well, for sure, you can ask them in the chat or the Q&A. So go ahead and utilize those. We may get to some of those throughout, but we'll definitely try to get to the questions at the end. I think the questions are really important because we're going to talk about the topics that you want to talk about in that sense. So we're going to, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get us started here. Today's topic is Solar 101. And it being Solar 101, it's my version of Solar 101, which is what do I think that Nebraska homeowners, business owners, farms might want to know before they invest in solar. And there's a lot of different topics that we're going to try to cover today to get some of that kind of 101 experience. And we also have some stuff we might miss. So that'd be where you ask questions to try to fill in the knowledge gap that you have. I just have a picture of myself here with the solar array that I helped install. This is not one that's at my home. This is one that's on a farm outside of Lincoln that I helped install about 7 years ago. So I just threw a picture out there. Today, we're going to try to get through all of these, how solar works, touch on solar equipment and some decision making with respect to which solar equipment to choose, production of the actual solar panels, how much electricity do they produce, looking at tilt and azimuth. Then we're going to focus a lot on economics because economics are clearly an important piece, partially because of the cost of the system and also because it's important to understand how good of an investment it is for people. So we'll go over incentives, savings, payback, net present value, and then again, we'll try to get to questions as we go. To start, I want to at least recognize that when we talk about solar, it's good to kind of to understand and be on the same page with who you're talking to. There's two types of solar, I'm breaking apart. There is distributed solar, which tends to be small scale at people's homes, businesses, or farms, is usually grid connected, behind the meter, customer owned, and the energy is used by the customer first, and then it goes on to the utility as excess. The other side is utility scale. These are the solar farms that are getting proposed across the state of Nebraska, and a couple of them are in the works to being built. And so that's utility scale, usually more than, I would say probably more than 5 acres, probably as much as 500 to 1,000 acres or more. So that's utility scale. Now, I don't mind talking about either type of solar, but we got to be clear on which one because the answers are different between the two because the economics are different and the sale of electricity is different and lots of things are different. So this should be clear. If you're interested in utility scale, we'll make sure you ask about that. This particular web seminar, we're talking about distributed predominantly. On the left-hand side of the screen is where you are. So the question here is why solar? And this is more of a question to yourself. Why do you want solar? Why did you join the web seminar today? Are you interested in solar because of the green energy? Because you might be able to get a tax credit? Because your business might get some depreciation? Your business might get some marketing value out of it? Are you interested in it to have a lower electric bill? And I point these out because everybody's motivation is going to be different. And some people might say, I need this to be have a good payback or a good net present value. And others are saying, well, I want the green energy. And the payback is just kind of something I'm interested in, but I'm more interested in the green energy. So there are different motivations, and we just need to recognize that in ourselves. And it also helps communicate that if you're actually getting a quote, communicating those goals and motivations with your installer will help figure out how big of a system do you want, what do you want it to be and do. I did put some cons of that residential type of system, as the initial cost can be expensive, and there's that, it's kind of like prepaying for your electricity for years in advance. Operation and maintenance is yours. I mean, you have to pay for operation and maintenance, which is not high, but is definitely, there is some. And then if you were to build this on your home and then you move, you may not get the value out of it because of the sale price of your home may not change enough to, or at all, depending on the buyer. So I threw in community solar because it's something that's out there quite a lot. They're doing a lot of marketing. I think there are pros and cons to community solar. The same thing, it's green energy. You can participate in it even if you live in an apartment or a place you rent. If you move, you sell it. So you can move from Lincoln and sell your community solar shares, and it's not a big deal. They're responsible for O&M. It's part of the original purchase price or the ongoing price. So there's not a lot of risk. The cons is that you don't receive that tax credit, or in most cases. There are some cases you do, but in most cases you don't. You don't get the depreciation because it's not part of your business. It's kind of this separate piece. Again, that's probably in most cases you don't get depreciation. We have to look at the details of the program itself. And it's not your location. So if you're wanting to have your business be green by having solar, the community solar, you're gonna have to tell people about it rather than them see it. So there are pros and cons to both having it on your home or business and doing the community solar. Now let's go into how solar works. The overall system is called a solar photovoltaic array. Sometimes you might just call it an array. It's all of it all together, all of the component pieces all put together and functioning. Each individual solar panel is called a module. The industry calls it a module. And most people call it a solar panel. It's fine to call it either one. Inside that module or panel, there are somewhere between 60 and 72 or two common numbers of solar cells. These are about 6 inches by 6 inches. This is called a solar cell. And they're wired together inside that module to make a panel. Inside that solar cell is a silicon crystal. And that's because of the characteristics of that silicon crystal in both absorbing light and the movement of electrons inside that silicon crystal. So if we think about that up in the upper right-hand corner, for those chemistry people out there, I have a Bohr model of an atom where I have valence electrons, and I'll go back and I'll throw that photon of light comes in and it excites that electron into a higher orbital. So we were thinking about what's happening. The sunlight hits it, it excites an electron into a higher orbital, and then that electron can become the electricity. So let's look at it again from a solar cell. In this case, it excited the electron moved all around at random in the silicon crystal, and then it recombined. Didn't do us any good. And so to be able to capture that electricity, the designers needed to create an electric field so that the electron knew where to go. So they create a positive and a negative side of that silicon crystal. So now when a photon goes in and excites an electron, it knows where to go. It's negatively charged, it wants to go to the positive side. So now let's look a little bit more on how they do that. They create the electric field by putting in impurities within the silicon crystal. In this case, phosphorus has extra electrons, thus creates a net negative charge. Boron has fewer valence electrons, thus creates a net positive charge. And they create a negative type silicon and positive type silicon. Those charges pull on one another and actually end up kind of switching sides at the PN junction in the middle of the solar cell. And now there is a positive electric field within the solar cell that the electrons know where to go. So now they're going to attach a metal wire. And if you look at the surface of many solar panels, you'll see the little tiny wires. These are the wires that catch the electrons as they move towards the surface of the solar panel or the back, depending on how it's designed. So there's this metallic little wire. If a photon goes in, a photon of light goes in, the electron is excited, it travels down through the wire, gets used in a load, in this case, the light, and then that electron or a electron fills in. So no electron was destroyed in this process. It just was excited, gave up its excitement, and recombined into the bottom. So let's watch that again, see how, so we can see how that worked. We can see that electron traveling clockwise. And if we go back, we can see something traveling counterclockwise. That little red dot, those little red dots are the holes. Bear with me here, the holes left behind by the electrons. And so those holes are critically important. We need to actually pay attention to those holes, because when we actually label the positive and negative side of the wires, it's actually the holes that is the electric current and not the electrons. So electrons are flowing clockwise, the holes are flowing counterclockwise, and we label that the positive side of that and call that the electric current. And we do so for a very important scientific reason, because Ben Franklin said so. Ben Franklin made an observation and what he called the electricity moving from positive to negative, and we have adopted that as the way we do it. And if we could go back in time, maybe we would label them the opposite way and all our wires would be the opposite and it'd be fine. But Ben Franklin made an observation, we stuck with it, and it's worked out just fine, because as long as we all agree which side is the positive, which side is the negative, it works out. So just a little bit of history and fun there on how solar panels work to create that electric current that we are then utilizing to power our homes or whatever we're trying to power. The system itself, we've introduced the solar module already, and we have this module. The module has a racking. Those are the two major component parts. And then you have inverters that we'll talk about more in a minute that convert that from that direct current electricity into alternating current electricity. This slide is just to remind us that there's a lot of parts, and it takes a good installer, some good attention to detail to get all those parts put in and looking nice and all functioning properly. And again, not only functioning properly right away, but functioning properly in the long term, right? We want this to sit there and work for many, many years to come. So I just wanted to introduce a whole bunch of the different pieces and parts that are included. So one of the questions I get quite a bit about solar panels themselves is, should I get a monocrystalline or a polycrystalline or a thin film? Silicon solar cells are the most common solar chemistry that is available to purchasers of solar, because they work really well. They're the low cost. The industry is working hard to try to get some new chemistries that are lower cost, but they're not really available that much. So these three types are the most common out there. They're all silicon based. Monocrystalline, mono meaning one, is made from one giant crystal. Polycrystalline is made from lots of crystals all mixed together, and you can kind of see it almost has that kind of reflective face to it here in the middle. So that's a polycrystalline, and then a thin film is kind of like painted on to a surface a little bit. We can think of it in that way. But efficiencies, monocrystalline are most efficient. Polycrystalline are kind of middle efficient, and thin film is not very efficient. The challenge, people say, well, I want mono then, right? Well, I don't know. The reality is you can see that the lifespan of mono and poly are about the same. And the manufacturing costs are lower for the polycrystalline. And that's why, in many ways, I like to look at things based on the price per watt rather than trying to look at efficiency. Because sometimes I can get polycrystalline solar panels can be purchased at a low enough cost that it's worth it to give up that little bit of efficiency, especially when space isn't limited. If I only had a little tiny roof space and I was trying to maximize how much power I could do in that space, I might purchase a monocrystalline. Otherwise, I might just go with one that's the lowest cost per watt for a good solar panel. Thin film, there's not a lot, not as many out there for home use. Thin film might be, you might see some thin film solar in kind of the little solar lights that you put in the ground and some of those little things where maybe efficiency isn't as critical and how long they live isn't as critical, because those are going to break probably and wear their battery out way before the solar ever wears out. I threw in some other chemistries just because you might run into them. Cadmium telluride is probably the most common of those other chemistries. There are some solar panels out there that are cadmium telluride. Amorphous silicon and copper indium gallium selenide are three different chemistries that you might see out there, becoming more common as the price comes down. All right, so what I have here is an image of a line drawing per se of a solar array. And you can see that what I have is solar panels. I drew 2, but this could be 2 or 10 or 25 or 50, however many it is. It's 2 solar panels. They are creating direct current electricity that goes into the inverter that's making alternating current electricity that is compatible with the home and the grid. It goes through a disconnect, which is there just for the utility to be able to shut that system off if needed. It goes through the meter and then to the load or to the grid, depending on what's going on at that moment in time. You'll notice that there's not a battery, because in most cases, batteries are expensive and probably not worth the cost and the added maintenance in today's market for what they're going to give you, unless you really need backup power for because you're in a location with poor with power outages that are more common. If you're in Lincoln and your power outage is once or twice a year for a half an hour, it's probably not worth spending the money on the battery. If you did put a battery, you'd have to add some extra components. You can see all of the components that we had before, but we added a charge controller, a large battery, and then a second disconnect that now can disconnect the entire house and solar from the grid, so that now the home can run on its own battery. And so that disconnect is important so we don't backfeed to the grid during a power outage. Now, I just have a couple pictures, and I have a lot of pictures later, but the choice to be made then, depending on where you are you interested in a ground mount system or a roof mount system? And based on that choice, and a lot of that choice is some of it's personal preference, but some of it's also your location. Do you have a location for a ground mount? Maybe, maybe not. Do you have a location for a roof? Again, maybe, maybe not, because depending on your tree situation and other things like that. So as you're thinking about the ground mount versus roof mount, I'm going to draw on the screen a little bit. Roof, and I have some details on why this is in just a moment. But if you have a roof mount, you can use microinverters. That's probably your best choice. You can use the string inverter with optimizers, also a good choice. The string inverter, the single inverter for the whole system, is not probably a good choice for a roof mounted system in most cases. For a ground mount system, the string inverter is, in my preference, your best choice because it's the lowest cost. The string inverter with optimizers is also a good choice, slightly more expensive. And microinverters work for ground mount systems, but they're expensive. And so it may not be needed to spend that extra cost for that ground mount. And we're going to cover the details of that in the next couple slides. But just wanted to talk about some of those design choices as you, if you ever get a quote from an installer. The size is going to be a design element, and the size should be determined by those goals and motivations that you have, but it also may be impacted by the space. If you have a small roof, you might be limited. I can only put a solar in of a certain size because your roof space limited. It may be a yard space limited if it's a ground mount. There could be a tree limitation where I can only put it in one part of my roof or yard because the trees are causing shade that would do harm to the production of the system. Energy use can be a way to size it, where maybe you're trying to be green and you size it to 100% of your home's annual use. You could size it to maximize economics by sizing it a little smaller. About 50% of your home's annual use is a good size for an economic standpoint. You could be basing this on initial cost. How big is your budget? How much states taxes do you want to try to get off? You know, taxes are motivating. Reduction in taxes is motivating. If you are basing it on your budget, let's say, but you maybe say you thought, well, I'm going to put in, you know, 5 kW today, but I'd love to have 10 to serve a larger percentage of my home. You could plan for possible expansion. So you could build it in a way that expansion was easy. So that's, again, a communication piece at the beginning with your installer. I have 2 slides on the electric code, not because I want you to know the electric code exactly, but because the electric code dictates how systems are built, and making sure it's followed is important for your installer to do. But I think that the homeowner or business owner has a role to play in understanding at least these 2 pieces of the electric code, because then they can ask questions and hopefully get a better system out of it because of it. This one is Article 690.31, which says that there should be restricted accessibility to conductors over 30 volts. That means if there's a wire over 30 volts, it should not be easily accessible. I shouldn't be able to walk up and grab it. And that seems simple, but what we see is a lot of solar installers, and particularly ground mounts, that just bunch the wires up underneath. This one not only, this one looks a little bad, and you can walk up and grab it. So this one on the far left does not meet the electric code, and it's ugly. And so, you know, we need to be able to meet that electric code, and I'd like better wire management, even if we're going to leave it. But this one doesn't have good wire management. Luckily, I didn't take that picture. That's one I got off the internet, Creative Commons. But I have seen a number that are like that, and I kind of purposely don't take pictures so I don't pick on people so badly. But there's a lot out there. If it's a ground mount, generally it should have some wire coverings, and it should not have those exposed wires. Yet it happens all the time. If it is a roof mount, as long as those wires are tucked up nicely, they don't have to be covered up necessarily, because I'm not going to necessarily stand on the ground and reach up on the roof. They're not accessible. So that's restricted accessibility, not necessarily covered perfectly. So if it's way up high, if it's over a carport or something and you can't reach them, we don't have to have those wires covered perfectly. It'd be nice just to make them look nice. I have a couple of examples where they were covered nice on ground mounts. This is one that's using the wires are actually in these metal trays. And then there's a second metal tray down here for the next layer of solar panels. This one in the middle is called, I put the brand name of this product on because it's the only one that's like that. And I kind of think it's a pretty attractive product, called Solar Scrim. And it's just kind of you can almost see the wires. You can see them in there kind of hiding. But this is kind of a mesh, a very thick, heavy plastic mesh attached with screws, and looks real nice. Wires are covered up, meets the electric code. The last one I have, it meets the electric code because there's a fence there. Their wires can be hanging, but it doesn't matter. There's a fence. It's restricted access to the conductors. So ground mounts that, if we put a fence around this one on the left, it would meet the electric code. It's wire management still ugly, but it would meet the electric code. Okay, second electric code piece, and this applies to the next 3 or 4 slides. It is Article 690.12. It's called Rapid Shutdown, and sometimes it's called the Rapid Shutdown Rule. And so what this says is that when the power goes out, the solar panel needs to shut down very quickly within 1 foot of the solar panels in the 2017 electric code. So there can't be any energized wires that are more than a foot away from the solar panels. And that does impact how solar panels are built or designed. Solar arrays are designed. And we're going to touch on that in the next couple slides. So let's talk about the three types of inverters. Remember, there's three types: string inverters with optimizers, and microinverters. Why do I want one versus another? The answer is simple. If I have a ground mount system, and I have no shade issues, a string inverter works really well. And so you can see I have 12 solar panels on one large inverter, and that is the lowest cost system. And because it's low cost, that helps with payback. These other things, poor shade performance. So what I'm suggesting with poor shade performance is that if I'm shading just a portion of this solar panel, about this much, I can kill that whole bottom row essentially, because the way the solar panels are wired together. Partial shade can hurt. So if I had a tree that was causing me some partial shade through the day, that string inverter is not necessarily the best option. But in most ground mounts, we have very little, if no shade at all. So string inverters work well. I can't, when I look at the system online for monitoring, all I can look at is the whole thing. I can't look at individual solar panels because they're all wired together. So it's all one kind of entity from the monitoring standpoint. It does not meet rapid shutdown requirement automatically, because if the power was to go out, so if the grid went down and the power was out, this wire right here is still energized because it's not shut off. Actually, the inverters, it's shut off right there at the inverter, and that wire is energized at probably as high as 300 to 500 volts DC, and that's could be an issue for firemen and others. So does not meet rapid shutdown because it needs to shut it off way up here, right at the solar panel edge. And so without extra equipment, that doesn't meet rapid shutdown. Let's jump to microinverters, and then we'll go to that hybrid one. Microinverters are simply mini inverters where there's an inverter on each solar panel. And so each solar panel has its own inverter, and that works really, really well for partial shade, because if I was to shade one solar panel, all I lose is one solar panel. So it works really good. So this is really good for roof-mounted systems, particularly with partial shade, where you're trying to still get good production with partial shade, because you only lose one panel when you're shading one panel. Also, this meets rapid shutdown automatically, because as soon as that grid goes down, the AC that would be traveling all the way up here goes into the inverter, and it says, oh, I don't see the AC anymore. I'm going to shut that off right here. I'm going to read the questions now, because I can go ask some questions on microinverters. Okay, there's two questions about microinverters and string inverters, so it's a good time to answer them. And I'm going to start with the second one first and go from there. But it says that Keenan has said they've seen some ratings that suggest the micro inverters are more efficient. That could be that they're slightly more efficient. Inverters really have a pretty high efficiency, between 95 and above %. So I would expect that the efficiency is probably not a lot different between them, even if they are slightly more efficient. So you can kind of balance that change in efficiency and price, because if it's only 1% difference in efficiency, it probably is not going to justify the higher price necessarily. So I'm not real concerned about the efficiency as much as I would be trying to decide if the other properties of that microinverter are what you want. Another person said they had two quotes for on a barn and were similar in price. That's good, and I'd expect the overall price to be slightly similar, but maybe just a little higher for microinverters. But again, when you get two different people, they're adding their prices up slightly differently. And one might be taking a little more profit or a little less. One might be charging a little more for labor than another. So you don't know if where the similar prices came from, if it was in the components or in the rest of it. But one thing you want to double check on is I would ask them, I would use the word rapid shutdown. If you're thinking of this one with a string inverter, I would ask them, does this meet rapid shutdown? Does it need to meet rapid shutdown? Very simple. Now, what you're looking for in the answer is that they are confident in that answer, because if they're not, that's a red flag to say they don't know enough about the electric code. And again, string inverters do not automatically meet rapid shutdown for roof mounted systems. And if it's a roof mounted, it needs rapid shutdown. So they could be putting an extra piece of equipment in to do that. That'd be okay. Also, the string inverter, there is a caveat to that, which is this hybrid system I'm going to show next is a string inverter that meets rapid shutdown because it uses optimizers. It's possible that that's what they're proposing is the Solar Edge. That'd be the name brand. If it's a Solar Edge string inverter, it meets rapid shutdown. So a little detail there because it gets a little complex. Let's just do one last thing here, which is panel level monitoring. There is panel level monitoring. So when I get online and look at this, I can see what this one solar panel is doing at any given moment in time or last week or last day. And that's nice for monitoring. It's not something that is needed at 100%, but it can be nice, especially because you can kind of see where your shade is, because you can say, well, this panel didn't do as well as this one because this one must be shaded an hour a day or something. But also if one has a problem, you can identify it sooner. So that's good. All right, let's move on to the hybrid system. It's called string inverters with optimizers, Solar Edge. I'm going to name the main brand on this one because I don't know another company that uses optimizers. I think they do make a few other companies, but really the only ones I've ever seen installed are Solar Edge. And so what this is a hybrid system. It has one single string inverter, but it also has what they call an optimizer up at the solar panel. Each solar panel has an optimizer. So if you had partial shading of this solar panel, this can bypass through the optimizer and just lose that one panel. So it's got good partial shade performance. It is a little kind of an intermediate cost. It costs more than a string inverter, but less than a microinverter. So there's kind of that piece to it. It is rapid shutdown ready because again, as soon as this is going to shut down here, but as soon as this is shut down from electricity because it's not seeing the AC because the grid went down, it communicates up through here and this shuts down up here then, and it shuts down within the solar array itself, which meets the rapid shutdown requirement. These are a little old. These are the older version of the Solar Edge. The new ones are quite a bit smaller, but just a picture of a bunch of them together. This is a fairly large array. So what they had is probably 18 to 24 solar panels on each one of these. And that's why there's multiple. Depending on the size of your system, you might have one or two. It'd be common. So this is probably a farm system, fairly large. The sun's travel across the sky impacts the orientation of the solar for optimum production. So let's touch on that a little bit. I'm going to explain my complex slide here. But what we have is in this top line right up here is the orientation of the solar panel, north, south, east, and west. So south facing is right here in the middle, and then west and east, you can see how we're going to orient that facing south. And on the y-axis, I have the tilt. So how that is tilted. So 0 degree tilt is perfectly flat, 90 degrees is straight up, 45 is in the middle. And so what we're looking at is I modeled a system and saw what is the maximum production for that system. And so what we see is that if it is tilted, let's see if I can get my marker back here. If it is tilted between about a 34-degree angle and a 44-degree angle, facing due south, that's where we get the maximum production. This is a Lincoln, Nebraska model, but this applies generally across the state. We moved this number by a couple degrees as we went north and south across the state, but it's pretty common. And so we want to say, I want a south-facing roof, or I want to face it south as a ground mount to be ideal. And I like it to have a tilt of somewhere between 30 and let's say 45 degrees. Now, there is good news to that, is that you don't have to be perfectly optimum to still get a pretty good system. This is measured around where we're about 4% from optimum. And so really a roof mount of about 18 to 19%, which corresponds to a 412 pitch roof. So 412 pitch is a really common roof pitch, will get you a loss of only about 4% on an annual basis. So again, I think that it's nice to put it at the tilt of the roof and not have the roof be one tilt and the solar panel be another. Forget about it. Just put them, match the tilt. You're going to lose only a small amount. Also, you can tilt it up to about, I'd say somewhere in 55 degrees before you're going to lose. Once you get up higher than that, you're going to lose some production, and it can go down pretty quick. Now, if you have an east or a west facing roof, that doesn't say, not to say that you can't put a solar panel on it, but you can. You just have to recognize that you're going to lose as much as 20% of your production compared to south facing. And when you lose production, that's savings that you could have had, right? And so you want to do your economic analysis based on that difference in production and see how it looks and see if it works for you. If you combine east and west, so you have a roof that you can put it on both sides, east and west, you only lose about maybe 10%. So it's not quite as bad because you're getting morning and afternoon sun. But the south will get some in the morning all day long and some in the evening. So south facing is the best. I see some questions pop up. I'm going to go up and see if we can get to some of those. Some notes on other companies that sell optimizers. Sherry shared that said an installer's had some problems with Solar Edge and doesn't use them anymore. Fair. I have warrantied out 2 Solar Edge inverters myself. Now, luckily they did warranty them and they were actually pretty good to work with on warranty, but they broke and had to be warranted. So definitely there are reasons to consider some of these different pieces of equipment. Okay, Kathy, you mentioned cost. What is the average cost for a typical split level home? This is a really complex question you're asking, but I'm going to do my best to try to answer it in about 3 or 4 slides. And the reason it's tough is because, again, these design choices of size is to say a typical split level home might use 10,000 kilowatt hours a year. If you want to generate half of that in 50%, your solar array might be about 4 to 5 kW. I can give you the cost of that system. But if you have a design where you want it to be 100% of your home and it be 10 kW, then the cost is double. So the average cost is tough, but we'll try to get you some numbers here in a bit. Okay, so what we're going to look at is we're moving into the economic portion, and we're going to spend the rest of our time here and hopefully I got to get moving here. The gross system cost, that's what you are writing the check for. Total cost of the system. There is a 20%, 26% tax credit if you are a tax-paying person. The reason I say it that way is that if you're a church or a school or something like that, you don't pay taxes, so you don't get this tax credit. But if you're a home or a business, you pay taxes, you get this tax credit. Depreciation. If you're a business, you get depreciation. If you live in Lincoln, there is an LES capacity payment program. If you live anywhere else in Nebraska, there's not anything else, but there is REAP grants to apply for if you're a rural business or a farm. There's renewable energy credits. Sorry, we don't really have any of those in Nebraska, but in other states there are, so it's on my list. And then you have the balance of the cost or the net cost of the system. And so we're going to do a lot of our economics based on this number. And you're trying to pay this big green one off by saving electricity. That's the goal, is to save electricity. And so we're going to go over how to do that. We're going to start with the system cost. So Sherry asked, how much is the average split level home? So what we're going to look at here is a couple things. First of all, notice that the price of solar declined dramatically in the last 10 years. It has leveled out at least some right here since then. That's why this slide is still accurate, even though it's a couple years old, where we can look at the price of a system at $2.70 per DC watt is pretty accurate. Some I've seen, I'd say this is an accurate number for the Lincoln area. I've seen quotes that are higher than that, and I've seen a few that are a little bit lower than that. But right now we're seeing them run around that approximate price. That's a total installed cost. So back to Sherry's split level home. If the home uses 10,000 kilowatt hours a year, which is a decent average for a home that doesn't have electric heat, and she wants to generate 50% of her home's energy use. So we put in let's make it a 5 kW system. That's 5,000 watts at $2.70. Gross cost $13,500. That's gross. Remember, then you get the tax credit off of that, and the LES capacity payment off of that. So it would be less, but that's the approximate cost. If you want to do 100% of your home, $27,000 gross cost, because we would essentially double it to get to 100%. Okay, Kathy asked about the tax credit. The tax credit is federal, and you get the tax credit by simply filling out a very simple form on your annual taxes in April, or whenever you do your taxes in the new year. And it's going to ask you essentially one question: how much did you spend on solar in the past, solar equipment in the last year? And you're going to say $13,500. And they'll say multiply that number times 0.26. You multiply times 0.26, that's 3,510. You write that number at the bottom, and then you subtract that from your tax liability directly. So you get that money. It's like cash. You don't have to pay that much of taxes. So that's how you do it. It's a federal program. I have a slide on it coming up here as well to give some more details. But there is no state tax credit, but there is that LES capacity payment if you are a Lincoln Electric System customer. All right, now let's move on to the tax credit. The tax credit used to be 30%. It is now 26% and will be until next year, till the end of next year, at which time it starts to reduce to 22%, 10%, and then again, if you're a resident, 0% after 2024. If you're a business, it's 10% after 2024. So I have hope. This is my personal opinion. I'd like to see it extended. I don't want subsidies to go on forever, but I do like to see them go and get industries off their feet. And so I'd like to see it extended, but who knows what will happen. But right now it's 26%. So one of the questions that some people I like to tell people is, if you're considering solar seriously, now is a good time to consider it, because you can you can get this 26% tax credit before it goes down. And that's some savings that you wouldn't have otherwise. Now, that's not to say that if you go past this, that they won't either re-up the tax credit, or maybe solar economics becomes better even without it. That could happen. So don't fret if you miss this deadline. It's just worth considering now, because of the deadline can help you save a little bit of money. Farmers, there is this USDA REAP grant. It's 25% of the total cost of the system. You have to apply for it. It's not guaranteed. And you, if you need this to decide that you're going to do the program, apply and then wait and see if you get it, because it takes a little while to figure that out. Let's move on to depreciation. Depreciation is simply, and many businesses know how this is. I'm just going to point out, and probably you know this, that there is 100% bonus depreciation. So you can write off 100% of that in year one until the end of 2023. And then the bonus depreciation goes down. But even after all the depreciation goes down, you'll still have the modified accelerated cost recovery, the makers depreciation available to these systems for businesses. Two questions that I'm going to answer now so we can get to questions, because I think questions are important, is how much will tracking ground mounts increase the output? The answer is about 15 to 20%. Tracking means that there's two types of tracking. Single axis tracking, the system faces east in the morning and west in the evening, and every day it just tracks across the sky. Two axis tracking can gain you about 20%, and it is not only tracking east to west, but also tilting throughout the year. And for homeowner systems and small business systems, I don't like tracking. And I don't like it because it's added maintenance. Every time I've ever seen a tracking system, they break down. And that's not a huge deal to fix them, but if you're not a tinkerer and don't want to go mess with your system, that's a problem. If you don't want it to break down, so less moving parts is better. As you get big, in the 5, 10, 20 acre size, tracking, single axis tracking makes a lot of sense. So there's economies of scale with the tracking. I say I don't like tracking on smaller systems. It costs too much. Another question was, is there a standard licensing for installers in Nebraska? The answer is no. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but there is not a standard licensing. Yet, I will say this, there are the utilities, OPPD and LES in particular, are looking at kind of making a list of installers on their website that have at least gone through some training with them. And they are doing that because they want to be able to kind of help ensure that the systems put on their grid are maybe just a little bit, just to make sure that, ensure that quality is good, you know. And so they're trying to work with installers a little bit, though it's not going to be a certification or anything. It'll just simply be some added education for their system. So those wouldn't be bad lists to look at, no matter where you were in the state, but they're going to be ones. And then NPPD may or may not do something similar in the future. Other grants and incentives. I don't know if I have a slide for that. Oh, I have a slide, but essentially all I want to say about this is that anytime you get another grant, it is taxable income. And if you have to apply, it's not guaranteed. So you just have to keep that in mind, that don't be surprised if you get a $2,000 grant, it's not actually $2,000 because you have to pay taxes on it. The USDA REAP grant, we're not going to cover that in great detail, other than it works for ag producers and rural businesses. And rural in Nebraska means anything outside of Lincoln, Omaha, or Grand Island. Everything else is rural. You live in the middle of Norfolk, rural. So ag producers and rural businesses can apply. Ongoing savings. We're running out of time quickly. I'm going to skip some stuff, even though it's important. I'm going to skip it because I want to get to some stuff I think is more important. Okay, let's start here. The federal law. The federal law says that you can connect a system, you can install a solar system or any renewable system to your home or business. You can connect it to the grid, and the grid has to pay you for the electricity. That's what the federal law says. So it's really clear that you can do this. But I lost my. but they don't have to pay you very much for that electricity. They pay you avoided cost, which is 3 to 4 cents, and you're paying maybe 8 to 12 cents at retail. So they have to buy it from you, but they don't have to buy it for very much. That's the federal law. The state law, Nebraska adopted a net metering law in 2009, and it allows you to get at least a portion of that back as full retail credit for that 12 cents. So that's important in economics, is this net metering law. So let's explain net metering for a second. The electric grid is providing electricity to this home because it's turned its lights on and it's at night. You see the moon. The sun comes out, some solar is being generated. The home is using the solar. It might also be using from the grid at the same time if I've got a lot of load. You go to work, almost everything's off at home. The solar is still generating, the electricity goes out on the grid. All that is happening. Now what we need to do is determine the value of those parts, the electricity and where it goes. So if the electricity, so we're going back through this, if the electricity goes from the solar directly into the home, it essentially offsets, that's a kilowatt hour you did not have to buy from the grid. It's worth retail rate. Go back. We know that if we buy it from the grid, it's also worth retail rate because that's what we pay for it. But if we send it to the grid, its value is in question. And so that's what we have to decide based on the net metering law and the electricity prices that you have. So on a given day, the load is in green in this particular house, and the solar, it was a cloudy day for solar, and the solar generated that much. Essentially, all of that solar got used by the load, by the home, let's say, and it was all worth, I made up a number, 9.8 cents a kilowatt hour. All of it was worth that because it all got used. We look at another day. This is a low, they weren't using a lot of electricity that day, and the sun was really good. So all of the electricity that got used from the solar was worth 9.8 cents. But all of this electricity was valued, is determined by the net metering law and how it is applied. In Nebraska, the way that's applied is they're going to calculate how much you used from the grid, how much you sent to the grid. You're going to subtract those two and get the net. That's why it's called net metering. Thus, when you subtract those two, all of this excess can be worth retail because it could take it could zero out the grid electricity. If that value is positive, they call that net. That's you're using more than you generated or sent to the grid. That's okay, and your electric bill is just lower. So all good. If it's negative, they owe you for electricity. That is net excess generation, and they don't want to pay you very much for the net. And that's and I say the utilities naturally don't want to pay as much because it's only the electricity portion. They only want to pay for the electricity portion, not the portion of the electricity that helps pay for the grid. So they only want to give you a little bit, which makes some sense. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. Okay, so let's just look at a few months of that same home. In the month of January, the load was 6,000. Actually, this is a farm, pretty big numbers. And the electricity generation was solar was almost 1,000. So you just paid less for your electricity. Now let's jump to a month where it was different than that. In May, the load wasn't very high. The solar generated well, and now I have this net excess. It's a terrible N there. That's right there. And so that difference is the net, that's down here. And what's going to happen in Nebraska is they're just going to pay out this 778 times the avoided cost. We'll just call it 4 cents. And so now all of this electricity from solar was worth 9.8 cents because that's the rate I was using. So a bunch of it's worth 9.8 right there, but the excess is worth 7. And so at the end of every month, we're zeroing that back out and starting again. So that's the way Nebraska does it. And so it's also why if we size our system a little bit smaller, we can avoid having these months where we overgenerate. Thus, we're providing more of the electricity that we're making as 9.8 cents or full retail rate. That's where our economics is better when our systems are a little bit smaller. In a nutshell, to maximize the value of your electricity, the solar system, the solar you generate, you want to use it. That's the hint of that. Let's just look at some financial stuff really quick and be done. I ran some some models, very detailed models with lots of estimates, and included lots of things like operation and maintenance cost, insurance, the escalation rate or inflation rate of electricity. And I included all of those. You have to be very careful when you look at financial metrics from installers. They're not that they're trying to, hopefully they're not trying to misrepresent. Sometimes they are, but hopefully they're not. But not, I say very few of them do a good job of including all of the ongoing costs like insurance and O&M. And so their numbers are typically going to look a little better than my numbers because I'm including all of these things. So essentially what I want you to look at is this one right here. This one is the one that best represents a conservative assumptions of operation and maintenance and escalation for this home. So about 14.6 years. That's what I'm seeing right now for solar, maybe as high as 16 or 17 in some cases for residential return paybacks. Net present value in this case is positive. That's a good thing. But what I want to do is then point out that I have on the right-hand side, I have a red flag one that says, look, 10.5 years and you're going to make a whole bunch of money. Well, guess what? They had an escalation rate that's probably out of bounds. And so you got to be careful with that. I see Olivia popping up. I think she's doing that because I see the time is running short on me. Let's touch on let me touch on 2 slides and I'll be done. I know we're running a little long, but I want to get these last 2. These are the steps in the solar process as I've outlined. The way, if you have solar, it's going to be mostly like this, but not exactly, but that's okay. What you're doing today, I hope, is doing some studying of your electric bills and your energy efficiency. You're doing your solar homework and you're thinking about your goals and you're getting quotes from installers and hopefully you're getting multiple quotes. Get more than one. You're going to learn a lot because of the difference in them. And even if they're similar, there's going to be differences. And so that's important. Okay. You're going to contact your utility and you're going to do the design. That's done by you and the installer. The installer is going to do all these gray ones. And then finally, you're going to sign the utility agreement, have get the meter replaced and have a utility inspection, and you're going to turn it on. And so that's essentially the process in a nutshell that you're going to go through. But wanted to point out those couple things. The next one is, how do you pick an installer? Some of you have already gone to that step and have picked an installer. I'm not going to try to give you advice on which one or ones that I like. That's not my role. My role is to try to help you understand them better. So I want you to ask them questions. Simple questions, not scary questions. How many systems have you installed? Where are they? Are they near me? How many years have you been working on solar? Do you work with my utility? Can you see one? When you go see one, do you see straight lines? Do you see hanging wires that are kind of ugly? Is there good dirt work and good concrete work if there's any? Look for attention to detail. What is the estimated production of your system? You can compare that to this online model that's really easy to run. You can run that to figure out what a system might produce at your home. They should be similar. Your utility might have a solar calculator. LES and OPPD both have solar calculator. No, NPPD and OPPD have solar calculators on their website. So NPPD and OPPD have solar calculators on their website. How many, does my system need rapid shutdown? Again, you're just looking for the knowledge and their ability to answer that, because a good installer should be able to speak intelligently about rapid shutdown. It's an important requirement. You can find a list of installers on the Nebraskans for Solar website. Just search Nebraskans for Solar. They host a list of installers that's pretty as complete as any I've seen. Let's go to questions. And
if anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm gonna launch our last survey while anyone shoots out your questions. We'll see if we can get any answered or if there's any we missed.
Very good.
But I also wanted to thank John for putting this presentation together and sharing your information with us.
I'm going to come back to my contact information, because I do welcome, if you have individual questions, please send me an email or give me a call. If you want to model a system at your home, I can typically get together with you on Zoom like this, and fairly quickly we can run a model and get some good values for economic return. And if you just have questions about kind of some of those issues, I'd be glad to visit. And I'm willing to stay here for a few more minutes. If you guys have questions, we can then end the recording and then just go to questions.